So I'm going to introduce our panel, and then we're going to go into a little bit of questions and with each of them about specific projects that they're working on, and then we'll be opening it up to the room to ask some questions, because it's not every day that you have a fleet of really amazing media and content creators that can answer your questions, and you can potentially pitch your story to them today. Okay, so first we have, to my left, we have Stacey Leasca, and Stacey, I'll give you a brief intro, and then I would love for you to jump in if I'm missing anything. But Stacey is a former digital director at Good, and she is also a journalist professor at USC. Some of the things that jumped out to me in terms of the stories that she covers, she does a lot of lifestyle stuff, travel and leisure, men's health, but she has demonstrated that there is very much an appetite and an opportunity to pitch our stories beyond the general news and the social impact media. So she wrote a story for Glamour about border control and immigration. She's done a story that I'm going to have her share a little bit more with us after the introductions about prison reform. That was for Good magazine. So we will get to know Stacey a little bit more, but actually I'll keep going if that's okay. Yeah, okay. And then right after Stacey, we have Kristin Doidge, and Kristin is a pop culture and social justice writer. So Kristin writes for quite a few media outlets, including Good, Bustle, The Atlantic, Fortune, NPR, and Marie Claire. And something that's unique about Kristin's lens and what she's going to be able to provide to the room today is she's got the perspective of having media experience and also communications. So she knows how to be pitched, and she also knows how to pitch. And so questions can go both ways, and it really is a unique lens to be able to offer some insights on that. So please address any questions that you think might be able to propel your pitching skills. And then next we have Jessica De Jesus, and Jessica is the soon-to-be art director, and right now is the creative director for Bitch Magazine, or Bitch Media. Bitch Media or Bitch? Okay.
But it's reversed. It's art director now, creative director.
Thank you. So as of January, and she's going to be bringing to the conversation some points that we should be considering about how pertinent is it to have creative digital assets when you're pitching stories. What are media looking for? Can you just lead with a pitch, or do you actually have to have content and creative content? And then we're also going to be hearing about some of the creative content trends that she's seeing and some of the things that she's working on with Bitch Media. And I have some more things that I'd like to dive into, but I'll wait till we go through it. Next we have Britni Danielle. And Britni's really accomplished. It's not that everybody else isn't, but she's our panel influencer. She's got 25,000 Twitter followers. She writes for Teen Vogue, The Guardian, Essence, Glamour, Washington Post, but she's also published a lot of adult novels, so sounds a little saucy. Yeah. Yeah, that's the part that I'm just like, okay, I want to subscribe to this. She works on an initiative called Brown Boy Genius, which is a digital platform that empowers boys of color. And I think that there's a few other little nuggets that we can dive into in a little bit, but yeah, the novel piece, I'd love to hear more about that when we get around to it. And then last but not least, we have Emily Rice, and Emily has worked with and covered some of the Amaphiko stories before, so we have a great relationship with how to pitch her, but what she's going to be talking to us about, sorry, did I mention she covers for Vice Impact, and it was that New York Times, Daily Beast. She's also doing communications and writing for a foundation called the Paper Fig Foundation, which is created by the same creators of New York Fashion Week. So again, bridging philanthropy, cause, and fashion and lifestyle is something that she's very familiar with. But one of the things that I really can't wait for her to share with us is she recently did a podcast course and has a lot to share about the trends and landscape of podcasts. And I heard this fact somewhere recently, and I can't recall where it was, but someone said that podcasts are the number one medium for the way people are consuming news and content these days. And I'm sure many of you probably feel like that's about right. I personally, it resonated with me right away. That's how I get most of my news. So it'd be really good for us to think about how can we get your stories in podcasts, or even do you want to start a podcast and start your own conversation? Okay, so that is that's it for our intros. But I'm gonna dive into some questions, and please, whoever wants to answer, we've got 3 mics amongst. Okay, perfect. So I'd love to know just a general question about the media landscape and how it's evolved in the past few years. We've seen a swell of social impact stories and social justice. We've seen it pop up in media beats, like new titles, like the people of color and Black Lives Matter reporter. I actually saw that in one of my media lists the other day, and I was like, okay, this isn't just about social justice anymore. It's so niche. So if you guys could just talk about a little bit in your experience, how has the media landscape changed on a social impact lens, and how has that impacted your career and your path in the past few years? Does anybody have a?
Sure, I'll start.
Okay.
So I was writing primarily for print. I love the written word, but as Vice Impact kind of emerged, it was one of many Vice verticals, and it emerged really in the aftermath of the election in 2016. And the stories just flew in. And what I think is really interesting about any of the social impact kind of work that you are all doing is you can become sources for writers. I think that's a great way to get your voice into the conversation. Isn't necessarily to be thinking of, I want to pitch a story about my amazing organization or my amazing company, but rather to develop relationships where you become an authority on something, and then as the media landscape and the news landscape continues to evolve, reporters, writers, journalists are going to need to look to you to speak to these issues, because we are not writing as the experts. We are writing as people who interview the experts. So if you can become those authority figures, then you're going to get your name into these publications. It's not about, let me show you who I am, but it's about, she happens to have been a founder of this organization, and then it has kind of the same effect.
And did you guys have any beat-specific titles? I'm sure you probably had focuses if somebody covered feminism or somebody covered immigration, but
Yeah.
did the titles change ever while you were there? Or
No, I didn't have a specific title. It really, so much, I think probably everyone would agree that so much of it is about your relationship with your editor, and there's a trust that develops between writers and editors. So I think, I was just generally interested in social impact stories, and so those were the stories that were coming to me. But
for me, it's slightly different. Like, I don't specifically do social impact stories.
Yeah.
I mostly write about Black folks, and particularly Black women. And so through that lens, I'm able to cover multiple different, a range of stories. I do a lot of entertainment and pop culture, but I also do a lot of, this awesome Black women did this. And so you want to be that person, like you were saying, that can be an expert in a particular thing. And it's even so small as putting what you do in I live on Twitter, so putting what you do on in your Twitter handle. Last week I was looking for a Black female therapist who can talk about grief and miscarriages. And, I did my usual Google searches and connected with people, but we couldn't really talk.
Yeah.
So I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna go look on Twitter. And I found one, and we had a really good conversation about that. So if you are an expert in a particular thing, or you're really passionate about a particular thing, make sure you tell people about that. I know that as women, we often don't do that. I certainly don't do it enough. I don't go around saying hey, I'm really dope at this, but if you want to be that media person and that media voice and spread the word about your organization or your brand or your business, you have to sell yourself in that way.
Yeah, and that you bring up a good point about, I don't really use that language because it's true. People don't always use the same language. So where we might be looking for a writer that covers social justice issues or racial equality, and you're like, I cover stories about Black folks, and you're keeping it simple, right? And so being creative about how you're finding media and not thinking so linear is really key, we found. What are all the different ways that these writers are describing themselves on their bios? And that is something that has shifted from our end on the communication side of things. Using Cision and some of those databases is kind of old school, and Twitter is really the best way to find media these days, particularly because the newsrooms are smaller, but the writers are still all there covering the stories. They're just,
They're all laid off.
They're writing from
They're laid off and they're on Twitter.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, absolutely. Please.
I don't know if this, hi. Just to that point, there was a writer last year or 2 years ago, I think at The Atlantic, who audited her own stories to see how many female experts she had interviewed as opposed to male. Oh. And she found that she had not interviewed as many female experts as she would have liked, and had as many female sources in her stories as she would have liked, to your point. And so it's just another great reminder. I worked at the LA Business Journal, and I was determined. I had all male editors and all male leadership there, and I was determined to get more women and people of color in those pages. It was the last thing I did, and it was the last thing I did. Because I was determined. But again, that wasn't in my title, and we really didn't cover philanthropic causes or organizations there. So I had to kind of finagle and find a way to pitch my editors in a way that made sense to them. Something Nora Ephron spoke about a lot, about dealing with male directors. She said, make the story about them and they will want to direct your movie. Same kind of concept. But my point is, this writer who did this audit found that a lot of times women will say, even if she found the Black therapists, they might say, I don't have enough knowledge in this space, or I'm not, capable of being a source. So definitely, if there's one thing you do when you leave today, try to build up your confidence and your platform such that we can find you, because we want to have you in our stories, and that is a really great point and a great way to, we always need sources, and we always need, and we want them to be women. And so I just wanted to kind of drive that point home.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we're always thinking about how do we get in front of the media, but how are you guys finding your subjects? Like, what are some tactics that you use to find subjects that you want to interview? We've heard one about looking up a specific job title on Twitter, but...
Coming from the creative side, I've actually been finding so many artists on Instagram. Normally, you would go to a portfolio site, like several years ago, you'd go somewhere to Cargo Collective and kind of see their galleries. But Instagram has been like the biggest tool to find artists to commission.
Are you using hashtags? Do you already follow these people and you know who to follow? Are you able to find people that are sort of hidden gems that don't have a huge, massive following?
Lots of hidden gems. That's kind of the goal, at least like in my mind, for working at Bitch, is that finding artists and folks who aren't as exposed, and to support emerging artists.
That's really cool. Sure, a lot of you would love to hear more about that and like a specific case study example in a bit if we have time for the Q&A, because that'd be a cool one to workshop a little bit. Okay, so there was one more question I wanted to ask before we move on. Before we move on to the evolution of the past 3 years, I am curious, do you guys feel like it's plateaued a little bit? Like there's this swell and this rise, and these outlets are creating new space and new titles. I personally feel like it might be plateauing a little bit, but I don't think it's going to decline. But I'm curious, you guys are on the writing side, and what's your perspective on?
I think if we're going to be very honest,
Please.
Yes, it definitely is. I think, a lot of the publications I'm working for now have kind of turned back to, well, are we going to get a lot of page views from this? And there's still room for it, but it's kind of making sure that there is this very deep connection story to whatever publication you're pitching. So with Glamour, it has to be about women. It has to be about, women in politics, women in immigration, something that's very closely tied to that. With travel and leisure, I write a lot about environmentalism because it's impacting travel on this huge scale. So ensuring that you're pitching to the exact right person and the exact right publication is key now, rather than just blanket, because it used to be that even a year ago, if I got an email about a really cool organization doing amazing things, 5 different editors would want it, and now it's kind of like, well, is our audience going to connect with it? And I think that that's just the harsh reality of the media landscape. Just this week, 100 of our colleagues at Mike were laid off. So, and Mike was one of the best places to still place that kind of content. But again, it still exists, but it's exactly what we're talking about, of really connecting yourself to a story and not just like, I have this great organization, but I have this great story to tell about my organization.
Yeah, we always say that to anybody that we're coaching in workshops and communications. It's pitch a story, not a product. And always lead with the story. And I would even, if I'm looking at a pitch note that somebody's drafted about something that they want to get in front of a reporter, oftentimes I'll take the name of the organization out and the name of the person out, because if the media or the reporter that they're contacting cares about the angle on the story, they're going to get those details at some point. But really focusing on leading with the story is key. I'm curious. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
I think that one thing that is timeless, though, in terms of story, is timing. Timing is everything. I feel like it is the first question that every editor asks is, why now? So if you can think about what's happening, not just for you, like, oh, we're about, like, if there's a, we just exploded from 10,000 to 60,000, like, okay, that's a timing thing. This is big, it's growing, and there's something. But also connecting that to the larger landscape. Why are people going to care about this now? That's a really important thing, because that's what we always have to have in mind. If it's not connected to this time in this place, then it doesn't have a place.
Yeah, that's a good point. And on the topic of timing too, we're talking about the relevance of maybe it's plateauing, but I don't know that it's plateauing because it's no longer interesting. I believe it's plateauing because it's the norm and it's expected, and we shouldn't be making a big fuss out of it anymore. It's just kind of, these are the stories that we're covering, this is the content. We don't need to slap a title like social impact on it, but it should be impactful. It should drive, advocacy or action. It's kind of the norm. So that is, I don't know if there's any other perspectives of.
I just have one more thing to add to that too, is not to put us all out of a job, but you actually don't need any of us. Like, you guys can be your own creative content producers. You can be making amazing Instagram accounts, Twitter accounts, Medium posts, doing all this great work on your own that then we pick up because you look so cool. But yeah, we really are kind of this secondary force, and you're the starting point, and don't be afraid to be your own voice, because you're going to tell your story better than we ever will anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to, that's what I was going to say, we'll still be here because people like to get into publications, but I think you are able to tell your story better than we can tell your story, and I'm good at storytelling, but you can still do it better. So yes, create all of your content, and then the people will come. I think of that from Mo Better Blues, when they have that discussion about, appealing to what people like. You need to appeal to what people like, and in ways that they like to consume, whether that's podcasts now or Instagram. I don't know if Tumblr's still a thing, because I never really curled for me. But wherever the people you want to connect with are, that's where you need to go, and that's where you need to tell your story, because then we will see it, or an editor will see it, and they'll be like, hey, you need to talk to this person about this thing. And I'll be like, who's that person doing that thing? And then I'll find out.
I think actually if there's anything that's shifting, it's like we in the media are supposed to be at the complete cutting edge of things, but because of everyone's access to telling their stories, now it's like we're catching up. We're trying to catch up to the stories that you've already created, and we just have to find it first and get it bigger, So it makes our job harder, but I think you have a lot more power.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to add onto that too is audience, obviously. Always thinking about audience in this whole mix, because a lot of times on the client side, when we're working with clients like yourselves, they'll say, well, I want to be on the cover of the New York Times, or I want to be on Good Morning America. And I try to ask them, well, who is watching that? And or who's your audience? Oh, 18 to 24-year-old girls. Guess what? They're not watching Good Morning America. I teach at LMU, and I ask my students, do you watch the news? How do you get your news? And they're like, what, this is not a thing in their world. Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat,
Yeah, IGTV.
if we're lucky, and bless their hearts, but they're not. So the point is, think about that. And again, it could be a blog that's going to be more effective for you, and it could be a mix, right? I mean, it is good to still have some sort of media relations kind of campaign or program, because at the end of the day, it is good to have that third-party endorsement, which is what that implies, and why people still want to be in the media, and why we still thankfully have jobs, but sort of, if you will. Yeah, I just wanted to mention thinking about the audience and who you're telling your story to is always
Great.
Yeah, and again, just that it's changing. So I just wanted to say on your point of the last 3 years, also, what are we looking to going forward? 18, 19, 20, going to the next election. I was talking with Grist recently, and they were, talking about good and Upworthy, and the challenges they've had. We're actually poised, I think, to see more social impact stories. And again, with the whole Hillary Clinton situation, we had the good cover. Oh, God.
Oh, it was the worst. It was the worst night.
The good cover was Hillary Clinton winning, and it had to be scrapped. And so, do you want to speak on that for a second?
It was.
Oh, God.
It was literally the worst night of our lives. It was election night. We had this huge party. I was hosting a Facebook Live with my co-editor, Eric, and we were watching this roll in, and then we were like, oh my God, we already sent this entire issue to print that was all Hillary Clinton winning. And we had to leave at midnight and go to the office at like 6 a.m. and redo an entire issue in 2 weeks.
I want that other edition. Where's
I know,
that special edition of Hillary
in my
winning?
dreams. Oh God.
The Oh God,
Yeah,
yeah.
the Oh God issue.
Instead of good,
And
they
it was
reversed
worked
the-
out for us.
It was brilliant.
Yeah, Good ended up winning the magazine of the year actually that year. But so the point though is that we literally called every single person we knew for sourcing. So it's like being able to be like, oh, I know this person. I have this relationship with this person. Like go out for coffee with journalists. Talk about who they're working with. Hang out with us after, or, and we can introduce you to, if we can't do it, then if it's someone I know personally, if I'm like, oh, this isn't really something I'd cover, but like go talk to, Nina at Mike, go talk to whoever at New York Times. And it's like, we're happy to do that for people we know on this personal level. Just also, again, not to out us all, but we're just talking about how many emails we get a day. But I will always answer emails for someone I've met in person. If I met them in person, because then I'll have that overwhelming guilt that my mom would be mad at me for not getting back to my friend or something. So those personal relationships are really crucial. But yeah.
So hi, Stacey. Yeah. I saw you speak at the Amaphiko Connect in LA.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so that was great in terms of laying the land of the media landscape and how promising or terrifying it is. I'm not really sure where we landed there. But let's talk about content and the kind of stories that are inspiring you guys these days and what's exciting you, because, I guess the segue of, is it plateauing, is it changing, or is it just the norm? What does get you excited? If an organization that's doing something really impactful calls you, sometimes impact isn't always enough anymore. We see impact everywhere, so what is motivating you to listen to the rest of that pitch, ask for more information? What topics do you think are relevant and cool right now? And if you can share an example of a recent pitch that you received that you thought was this is really cool.
I have a good one that's coming up for travel and leisure. I'm leaving on Tuesday to go to Hawaii, and I was invited to come. I've covered surfing for a million years, but Vans specifically invited me to come to check out their sustainability efforts in the North Shore, just because the North Shore is, if you've ever been, it's like the most beautiful place. It's literally paradise, but they're having huge issues with styrofoam specifically, recycling issues, educating people living there and tourists to, stop having so much plastic waste. And they are doing all these amazing sustainability offers with one of the best female freedivers in the world, and also offered me time with Michael February, who, if you haven't ever seen him, he's the cutest person alive. But he's also the first Black man to be on the Surfing World Tour. Cool. And so he's got this really interesting story. He's there to help with sustainability efforts in the North Shore, and he also runs this program called Surfers Not Street Kids in South Africa, where he's from. So it's like, all of these different stories that this one guy can tell. I'm like, great, I'm gonna get 4 different pitches out of this. So that's something that's really valuable to writers, is like, if I can get multiple stories, but also obviously this is way cooler than just like, check out how we recycle in Hawaii. It's like, no, check out this cute surfer who is teaching everyone how to recycle in Hawaii. So that's something.
All right, so
fun.
somebody who doesn't have
Michael February on their
the
side.
amazing looks and record-breaking athleticism on their side, but they're still doing something cool. So I think what I heard was innovation versus impact plus dimples, maybe. I'm not sure. Okay, all right. So find yourselves a fancy spokesperson.
But I also think just like an interesting, the point is the angle. It's not just recycling, it's an angle on recycling that's different than before. Because actually, I've gotten so many stories turned down by Travel and Leisure for sustainability that they're like, our readership doesn't care. And it's like, it's sad, they don't. But when it's like, oh, it's this cool surfing angle on it, or whatever. And you've all got angles guaranteed. If we sat down with you for 5 minutes, we'd find 5 different angles, and that's what it's just thinking a little bit differently. And maybe that's the other thing too, is hive minding it, is sitting down with your friends, sitting down with your family, sitting down with other media people, other organizations to talk through what you think your story is. And a lot of times it's, by the way, it's you. That's a lot of it too. Like, you're all interesting, amazing human beings. Yeah. It's okay to be your own story.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of an exercise that we did at the Amaphiko Academy in Baltimore that I'd recommend that everybody try on themselves. But ask a friend that knows your organization or your cause or your initiative well to tell somebody else what you do. And listen to what they're saying, listen to what's resonating. It's a really powerful and good opportunity for you to actually hear how people are receiving your story, because good chances are that's how the media are receiving your story too. And sometimes you might be like, oh, well, they forgot the fact that it's a STEM program. They didn't even mention that this is like a big part of our story or our pitch, and maybe it doesn't need to be part of it then. And so it's a good opportunity for you to just hear what's resonating and decide what to ditch from your elevator pitch. Sometimes we become too scripted.
I think one more thing I would add to that also is that, in telling your own stories, you can also collaborate with each other, get to know each other, and find where your kind of work intersects, because you could create a story, like if it's 3 of you, 3 is a really good number, and if 3 of you are all doing something that's similar, that's a movement, that's bigger than each of you. So, and sometimes for writers, this takes years. Like I am working on a pitch with Rolling Stone, which is like my dream. And I've been dreaming for years about writing for Rolling Stone. And like, I'm crossing my fingers right now. But like, it started with an interview with Ani DeFranco like 5 years ago that was awesome. She's like just as amazing as you would imagine when you talk to her. And then I interviewed her again a couple years later, and I asked her if I could reach back to her, if I ever got this idea to Rolling Stone, and then I interviewed Joan Osborne, and I asked her the similar questions that I had interviewed Ani, and I was like, and it's about like motherhood and music, and how your music has changed through the course of your like giving birth and having a baby. It was fascinating. And I finally found the third just like a month ago, Taylor Barton. She's great. And I was like, wait a minute, you have an adopted child and your music has changed and now I was like, now I'm ready. And she was like, I know people at Rolling Stone. And I was like, boom. So sometimes it takes years to develop something, but when it's there, you're always looking for it. So if you could collaborate with each other to create something that could be a package pitch like that, that feels good to a writer.
That's cool. Okay, I want to ask some specific questions about things that I've heard each of you talk about, and I'll go in order again. But I would love to hear about the wash, rinse, and repeat story that you did. Actually, I'll just let you. I don't want to try to bridge it or introduce it. Why don't you just tell us what it is?
This is my favorite story I've written over my 15-year career. I wrote a story for Good Magazine it was actually the first issue I worked on with them, about the only cosmetology program in a men's prison in America. And I've been writing about prison reform for some time. I had gone to visit a women's prison that I've written about several times for a college graduation ceremony, and I called for background information on the education programming in California, because California, believe it or not, is doing a lot better than a lot of other states. We added the word rehabilitation to our correction system, which is fabulous. And I was talking to the girl, and she was like, oh yeah, well, we have like a similar cosmetology program at Chowchilla in the men's prison. And I was like, oh, you mean like a barbering program? And she's like, no, I mean straight up cosmetology, because it used to be a women's prison and they converted it into a men's prison, and legally we have to keep all the same programs for 1 year. And now it's their most popular program. The only way to get in is if someone gets out of prison. And these guys go in and I walked in, it's this hot pink beauty salon, because it used to be a women's prison, and who cares if it's a men's prison, it can be hot pink too. And these guys are doing pedicures and facials and learning to dye each other's hair, and a lot of them I didn't add to the story because they this is kind of talking about angles specifically. This is something that Nancy Miller, the old editor-in-chief, and I went back and forth on a lot, where a lot of the guys I didn't feel like deserved a redemption story because they had done such awful, awful things. But thankfully I found one guy who had just stolen cars like 4 times, and due to the 3 strikes rule in California, ended up in prison for 4 or 5 years. So then I wrote the story about this guy and how he got this amazing degree program that, I mean, have you guys ever asked your stylist where they got their degree from? Like, I bet none of you know. And you're not gonna walk into a hair salon and be like, oh, a guy with tattoos from neck to fingertips, like, he must be ex-convict. It's like, you don't think that way. And so this is a great program for these guys. I truly believe incredibly deeply in vocational programming in prisons, also because these people are then walking out with really high-paying jobs. And so what attracted me to that was obviously, again, the incredibly unique angle of guys learning to perm in prison, and murderers, like serial killers, and bad dudes, but then also some guys who don't deserve to be in prison, I think. Again, that's a whole different story, but so what attracted me to that was the uniqueness of it, the time I was allotted with the guys, like being able to go in, spend a whole day with them, learn about their lives, and all that kind of stuff. Angle, time, and really pretty pictures too. That was another part of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Do you guys measure the impact of stories? Like, how would you go back and track, did readers get inspired and create new programs, or are you ever able to track any of that?
I've done like some follow-ups to that story. I've done a follow-up for Mike about music programming in women's prisons. The women really, really respond well to music programming and all that. So I've done a lot of follow-up reporting. I get a lot of comments on those posts for sure. I get a lot of, those are the ones where I get nice emails instead of like the terrible emails I get for every single men's health story I've ever written in my life. It's true. Like,
is that a common thing? That's a thing. Hate mail,
hate
response?
Especially for men's publications. Like, that's my like awful ones. But so I feel like, we measure it in views for sure, and then that way, if we get a lot of views on something, we're allowed to write about it again.
Sure. Okay, Kristin, you've got Good, Bustle, The Atlantic, Fortune, NPR, and Marie Claire under your belt. Can you tell us what's new at any of these? Like, what's most exciting? What's new at any of these outlets, or what should we know about them?
Yeah, so I was going to say this on the last topic, but I think it's still relevant here. Something Nancy Miller always talked about. She's awesome and legit. You should look her up if you don't know her. She's written and edited a lot of really cool pieces. And when she was leading Good, she thought we should be committed to service pieces. And so to follow through the oh God issue, really, when we're talking about social impact, it's what can we do, and what can we do now? And so that's why I was trying to keep us focused on, if there's been a plateau, what are we gonna do now? Because that's what we all really ultimately wanna know. And obviously, part of the reason why the 18 to 24-year-olds are checking out of the news is because it's depressing, right? It's like, all of us are exhausted, And so if we do want people to read our stories and to ultimately learn about what you guys are doing, we have to have a reason for them to read. And so I do some writing for Girl Boss, and when I do get pitches for that, or when I'm trying to think of cool things to write about, I always try to think about what would I want to read right now, and what's a, again, service meaning tips, so what are 7 things I need to know right now if I'm traveling for work, is one I did recently, or again, if it's just something that I haven't read or seen somewhere, I try to cover it, because then, you get paid, but that's really not why you're doing it. You're doing it because you're trying to find a cool story, and ultimately you figure if I'm wondering it, probably other women are too. So, yeah.
So that brings up the question about call to actions, because sometimes I'll read an impactful story and there's not a call to action at the end of it, and it's kind of frustrating, but then I don't know what a reporter is thinking. If I'm pitching a program, let's say I'm pitching Red Bull Amaphiko, and I'm saying, hey, this is a new platform, it's really cool, it's coming to, and what's the call to action? Well, we want people to participate and to apply to become part of the program.
Yeah.
Sometimes media might see a request for a call to action to be promotional.
Yeah.
So when do you feel like a call to action is acceptable and okay? And when are you kind of like, I'll tell people what to act on? It's
Yeah, that's a really great point. So solutions journalism is definitely a certain kind of journalism, and it's definitely more advocacy oriented. And so all of us are sort of, I think, in that space, but there's definitely still, sort of backlash towards, we certainly wouldn't want to include, for example, like a direct link to something, because that would be falling towards more of the branded content situation. When I was at Good, our vertical was sponsored by Dick's Sporting Goods. So again, it was all independent editorial, but it was tricky. So again, coming from the client side, I know that clients always want, like, your website, for example, hyperlinked. We can do that. We can usually do that. Just for relevancy purposes and SEO purposes.
Yeah.
But in terms of like actually getting you where you want to be versus what our editors want us to do, that's the push-pull, that's the negotiation.
But sometimes if the call to action is like, vote, and here are all the different ways that you can vote.
Totally.
And, so
that's where the creativity comes in.
Exactly.
Because you
So,
really
like,
have to be really clever. Yeah, you have to be really clever, yeah.
So what's the most creative way you've seen someone plug their initiative, their call to action, but it didn't feel like it?
Yeah, it has to be mission focused. If your mission is ultimately to get less plastic water bottles being used, and you can somehow get that into the story, that's a win, right?
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
we can't, again, we know what you guys, what clients want. We also know what our editors want, which is the most factually accurate story that is not about anyone. Anytime there's any hint of promotion, they're gonna say no.
Right.
I'll say I have an expert from so-and-so. Well, who did they work for?
Right.
So.
Okay. I'm going to have to go a little faster with this because I do want to allow room for Q&As, but I have a couple questions for each of you. I would love to understand, Jessica, what is happening on the content front? What content is cool and inspiring? Is video still the relevant thing that people should be looking at? What's cool? What's now?
Well, I think on the visual end of things, the idea of an editorial illustration sort of has also, I feel like, plateaued. And I think...
What do you mean by that?
I think there was a heyday of looking at the New York Times and seeing these op-eds with really conceptual visuals and illustration. And a lot of times, or at least throughout my career, creative design, etc., they've been taken for granted. And it's really important to have people in place to try and make that important again, to push that forward, to convince people, to show them why art is important to, in conjunction with word. Something we recently did at Bitch was we did a week-long series on chronic illness. It was called In Sickness. We received a lot of positive feedback from that because many people who have chronic illness were reaching out and saying, I haven't seen this content before in one place. And as we were preparing for it, we really wanted to find an artist that also had chronic illness to work with this series. So we put a call out on Instagram and asked people who had chronic illness or long-term mental illness also to apply. And we got over 400 submissions of people just sharing their stories of how their illness has affected them as an artist. And
so what did you do with that? Did you do a whole photojournalism series, or what did that turn into?
We ended up finding one artist, LA-based actually, her name is Panteja, and she is an artist that lives with chronic illness. She had this whole series of different illustrations that she already made, and that she was just doing for herself. And it wasn't commissioned. It wasn't like, hey, we have this idea. She was already creating the content when we just saw it and we put it together with these stories, and it just was a really powerful, response.
Cool. That's actually, Britni, I'm sorry, I'm going to skip over you for a quick second because it's a good segue to something that Emily, you're working on, your photojournalism project that's sort of in its infancy, but it was really powerful when you shared it with me. So can you share with everybody a little bit about that?
As a writer, I do it because I love it, so sometimes there are projects that I just start because, I have to start them. And so I had been admiring this one photographer's work who has published in some great publications, and we had a mutual admiration, and so we decided we wanted to collaborate on something together. So we're doing a photojournalism essay on, it's the working title, which I love, is We Should Call Them Warriors, and it's about survivors of domestic violence, interviews with them, sharing their stories, and beautiful portraits of them
As opposed to calling them victims.
Well, yeah, so, we used, and the first line is we used to call them victims, now we call them survivors, but we should call them warriors, because really, that moment of fighting back is actually, it's a war, and they just won that war when they walk away. And of course, there are many who don't win that war. So, that's what I'm working on right now.
Cool. All right, so I know that everyone in here would probably really love to learn as many ways possible to get their Twitter following to 25,000 followers, and you do so many amazing things, and I am sorry that I'm focusing on Twitter, but I think I'd be doing people a disservice if I didn't talk about social media a little bit and how you're able to leverage that and what conversations really engage the strongest.
One of the ways, I rage tweet a lot, and so...
Rage tweet.
That's always
Hashtag.
good. I don't know how that works out for you in your particular. You might want to blow up your mission, going off on somebody. But I do also pay attention to trending topics, and
on the Twitter handle,
yes.
trending
Oh,
topics.
yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Daily, and
Okay.
Because they're
That's a good
there, so I use them.
All right.
If it's something that.
Can you give us an example of the most sticky one that you did?
Fun fact. Okay. I was going to a conference in Dallas, and I saw on Twitter, while I'm waiting in the airplane, oh, what's going on? It was about Cardi B.
Okay.
And Cardi B had a little culture, and that was her name, Culture, whatever, Cephas is old boy's name. And I was like, I saw a lot of people being like, oh, that's a terrible name, and it's not the best, but Cardi B's name is Bella Collis, Alamanzar. Like, it sounds
Yeah.
like a Harry Potter spell,
Yeah.
right? And so I tweeted something about that. I was like, oh, her name is this name, and his name is something else too that's real interesting. And like, they wouldn't name their kid Jennifer. And so I said, it makes sense. And then like, by the time I landed in Dallas, it was like all these people had like retweeted it and liked it.
that's
And
funny.
you know, those kind of things get you people to add.
Okay. And do you try to keep it on brand with some of the topics that you're known for, or sometimes you just, I'm going to branch out
it's
and give
just
my
stuff
opinion?
that I like. I'm also like a very big live tweeter of things.
Yeah.
From Love and Hip Hop to press conferences that I don't call him the president, that that he gives.
Yeah, yeah.
So I go across the spectrum, or if it's something that I'm really passionate about, politics, or a particular social issue that people are talking about, or they're talking kind of around, then I jump in that conversation and I try to add something interesting, whether it's links or it's whatever. Even things like holidays. So this past Cinco de Mayo, I had written an article last year, maybe the year before, about Afro-Mexicans and just kind of the history of things people might not know about, like, hey, there are these Afro-Mexicans out there. So this past Cinco de Mayo, I basically just turned that article into a Twitter thread, and it got a lot of engagement and a lot of retweets, and people were like, oh my God, that's so great, I didn't know that. And then
That's cool.
those kind of things give you followers. I mean, I think being able to tell your story on Twitter is good too, because it forces you to be concise. It forces you to get to the point. It forces you to figure out what people like and what kind of like resonates with them. And those are the things that will bring people to you. So if you work in a particular organization, or you have a particular brand or a business, like use GIFs. I call them GIFs.
I call them GIFs. The battle.
I call them GIFs. Like, use images and videos, because those are things that don't just kind of go by without people. If your tweet is just all text, like,
Yeah, true.
you just
Okay,
use a
we've got
GIF.
5 minutes for questions, but I have one micro question for everybody. Just give me one word. What is the number one way that you consume or find your news? Where do you find your news? Twitter. Okay, we got one Twitter.
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 NPR.
NPR. Okay. Bustle, I like it.
Twitter or Apple News?
Okay, and I'm Twitter. All right, Q&A. Who do we have? Okay.
I don't need it.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Sabrina Garba. I have a quick question, because I know a lot of you have written stories for big brands, but also individuals. So what is one thing, given the fact that all of us have a different sphere of influence in this room, that we can leave here and do that'll shift and increase the possibility of us being naturally picked up?
Can I just ask that anybody speaks, give your name, but also what organization are you with, or what's your initiative?
So I run a company called the Glamour Group, and we increase organizational efficiency through cultivating organizational culture, and leadership and development.
Cool. Okay.
I mean, I think it was touched on earlier, but the best thing that you can do is keep doing dope things and do a good job telling your own story. And just kind of build your, social media is the thing, right? Build your social media platforms and kind of connect with the right people so that they know about your story. Even if you don't have 20,000 people on Instagram, like, you can use hashtags in such a way where you'll be able to build your visibility in that particular arena. And then when we're looking for stories, which we always have to do, and we have like, hey, I need to write about somebody new, a story that nobody was really talking about, like, we might find you in that way if you're already telling your own story in that way.
I'm going to let someone else ask a question just so that we can try to get... Yes. Do you need a mic? Okay. Yes, please introduce. Okay. Cool. Snaps. Nice.
And my specific question was for Emily, actually, because
But I wanted to know, like, how was that when Vice Impact launched and like the direct, like store, like the direct impact, like no pun intended, like on how it was for you, like the stories that you're connecting with, and like with like editorial. Like I know on Marla's end, she was really excited to launch that, but I know it's a really long time coming. And so for like Solidarity, it's like going to be its first video.
Are you familiar with it, Emily?
I am familiar with it, but I actually came on after that, so I don't really feel like I can answer in an informed way how it was when it first launched. I know for me it was life-changing when I came on, but it was after it was life-changing for you.
Sounds like an amazing initiative, though. Thank you for sharing. I think we had one over here, and then I'll get to you. Do you need a mic?
Yeah, that's the mic.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Christina, and I am a dancer who now creates movement for the I create clothing for the moving body, so I'm a clothing designer now, and dancer, whatever. But my question actually is based around how you all find, how you maintain your sanity, I guess, being on the internet 24/7 and trying to find inspiration, but then also staying grounded in like your body. I recently just removed Instagram off of my phone because I was going crazy, but then I also know that that's such a good tool in connecting, and I've just been writing down all this crazy stuff that you guys have been saying that I know is going to be really helpful, but I'm also afraid to re-download this app right now, so I just wanted to know if you had any like special tips on how to keep it together.
I have a first, like barely keeping sanity every day. Truly. But I used to be the social media director at the LA Times, and when I came on, it was my job. I was like 27 too. I thought I was like the hottest shit, and it was my job to get all 500 byline journalists on Twitter. And yeah, like kill me. And I was like, oh great, who doesn't like Twitter? Turns out every person over the age of 40 hates it. And and Pulitzer Prize winning journalists don't think they need to do that because they probably don't, but it was my mandate. But to make it manageable for them, what I did was say, okay, all you need to do is like tweet once a day if you're gonna do it, or if you really wanna commit, tweet 3 times a day. Tweet one thing you wrote, one thing someone else at the LA Times wrote, and one thing you just loved on the internet today. And that way it's just like, this is my plan of action. Even for myself, for like self-promotional reasons, I've since shifting from more daily news to lifestyle, I've really become very invested in Instagram. And with Instagram though, I just post once, maybe every other day. And I also hired a kid to do engagement for me. So like, hire people, and he's like $30 a month, and he's my godsend. I love him so much. But yeah, so make it manageable for yourself, give yourself a plan, and also connecting with your own body, by the way, it has been really helpful for me too. I really did have like a complete mental breakdown recently from having so much work to do and having to be on the internet and dealing with Donald Trump all the time just killed my soul. So I actually got back into horseback riding, which was something that I did as a kid and has brought me a lot of joy. So I think making sure that you're like, you know what, yeah, this is life and work, or this is work, but I also have a life, making sure you do that, so.
Okay, we have room for one more, and I know you had your hand up, but I am curious, does anybody want to pitch their business to the media panel that we have here? Is anybody? It's gutsy, but okay, perfect, that's convenient.
So pitch my... Okay. So hi, my name is Saraya Espinosa Salamanca. I am founder and CEO of Dreamers Roadmap, a free national mobile app that helps undocumented students across the country find scholarships to go to college. Is that good?
Well, that's what you do.
Okay.
Okay, so what do you want from them?
Oh, well, the question that I had, it's 2. One is, where can we find each of y'all? Because y'all are all amazing and are giving really important insight, and would love to stay in touch. Okay, thank you. I put my glasses on, like, because I can't see. I added y'all on like LinkedIn. I found some of you, but I didn't find
in the spirit of improv, so what do you want from them when you're talking to a reporter?
I actually already sent messages to a couple of you that I found on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And the ask was basically what you guys were telling us to do, which was tell you, like, I would love to sit down and chat with you
tell you my story and see if like you would write it, or if you know somebody within like your realm of network that would write my story.
Is there a timely angle that you can mention when you're reaching out and saying like, the reason why I want to talk to you about it now is because we're going to be launching
definitely.
this?
I think Dreamers has been a hot topic for like a really long time, especially with this current administration and like the caravan and like DACA always on a limbo. I think it's extremely important.
And so maybe there's a unique angle. You're coming at it from either an ethnic or an age perspective, whatever it might be. That could be worth mentioning too.
I think it's because it's like my personal story. I was formerly
Perfect.
an undocumented student, and I went through this, and I wasn't able to go to college right after I graduated from high school because my counselor told me that people like me couldn't go to college. So after I graduated from high school and found the resources, I built this tool to let these thousands of students know, like, you don't have to end here. I found the resources for you. You just have to find this tool and pursue your education.
Cool. No, that was great.
Okay.
I know.
Awesome. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
We might have a story landed.
Interested in writing a personal essay. Like, we could help you find cool editors, but like your personal essay, again, is better than what we're going to write anyway. So I
It's true. No,
That's
no
like
offense.
a personal
It's true.
statement.
But the first person is so powerful.
Okay. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was great. That was a perfect way to close it. So we're all done here. Are you? Oh, you were looking at me. Okay. Oh, I love you. I think it's lunchtime. Yes. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Oh wait, we have gifts. Ash.
Oh, okay. Hello. If you took a photo of the panel, please send it to us. I would like to see.
Yes.
Like, please do. I would like to see them. Hopefully, I look good in them.
Yeah. And to
Thank
thank
you,
our
thank you.
panelists and to plug one of the social entrepreneurs in the room, we've got the Shrill Society Nasty Woman card game. It is such a good game. We have it at our office, and we play it because we're feminists and we should support these things and the people that went through the Amaphiko cohort. But Amanda doesn't always describe it this way, but this is how I find it when I'm playing with it. It's kind of like Cards Against Humanity. You got to know your audience. You got to know like what response will resonate with the right audience. But it's really fun, and you learn a lot about really powerful women. And yeah, it's pretty affordable too. I think it's like $24 or something like that. So yeah, if you already have an issue or an edition, which I hope one of you does, then maybe you can gift it for Christmas. Okay, that's my plug for Amanda in the back. She didn't even pay me to do that. I just really like the game. And that's it. Thank you all for your questions, and thank you to our panel. You guys are great.
And thank you to Melissa. Please give Melissa a hand for moderating that panel. So yes.